You were never my choice, the vampire king said at the ceremony, but he broke his own rules that night. The grand hall of Castle Thornwick was suffocating. Thousands of candles flickered against walls of black marble, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the ceremony unfolding beneath the arched ceiling. Isabel stood at the altar in a gown of white silk and silver thread, her hands trembling as she stared at the figure walking toward her with measured, deliberate steps. The vampire king, Dominic Ashford, a legend whispered in darkness, a ruler feared across kingdoms, and according to the ancient contract signed by her father, her husband. She'd prepared for this moment her entire life, not because she wanted it, but because her father had promised her to the vampire monarchy 22 years ago, before she was even born. The agreement was sealed in blood and magic, binding, unbreakable, eternal. Dominic reached the altar. He was breathtaking in the way dangerous things always are. Pale skin that seemed to glow under the candlelight, eyes like molten silver that reflected centuries of existence, dark hair falling just past his shoulders. He wore robes of midnight blue and black, adorned with rubies that looked like frozen blood. When he moved, the very air seemed to bend around him. The high priestess of the coven began the ancient vows, her voice echoing through the hall like the toll of a funeral bell. Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs, so violently she thought it might break through skin and bone. Do you, Dominic Ashford, king of the eternal night, take this woman as your bride, bound by blood and magic, for all eternity? A pause stretched between heartbeats. Dominic's jaw tightened. His eyes, those terrible, beautiful eyes, slid toward Isabel, and for a moment something flashed across his face. Anger, defiance, regret. I do not, he said. The entire hall collapsed into silence so complete that even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. Her father's face turned purple in the front row. The priestess's hand trembled, dropping her ceremonial staff. Your Majesty, the priestess whispered, her voice cracking. The contract. The contract, Dominic interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade of ice, was made by my father and her father. I am not my father, and I will not be bound by agreements I did not make. He turned to face the assembly, his voice rising to fill every corner of the hall. This ceremony ends now. This woman was never my choice, and I will not pretend otherwise. Let it be known throughout all kingdoms that the wedding is dissolved. The alliance is null. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing with finality. Isabel stood frozen, her white dress suddenly feeling like a funeral shroud. Around her, chaos erupted. Her father was shouting. Nobles were whispering in shock. But all Isabel could feel was a strange combination of relief and humiliation, so profound it threatened to shatter her entirely. She'd been rejected by the most powerful being in existence. In front of everyone. And somehow, she couldn't find it in herself to be entirely heartbroken. The castle that night was no longer a place of celebration, but a tomb of whispered scandal. Isabel had escaped to the gardens, needing air, needing distance from the pitying looks and the mocking whispers. Her expensive wedding dress was a liability, so she'd abandoned it in a pile on the floor of her chamber and changed into simple riding clothes. No one would look for her here. No one cared where she was anymore. The night was cold, biting at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. The rose garden stretched before her, pale blooms looking ghostly in the moonlight. She walked along the stone paths, her fingers trailing over thorns and petals, feeling absolutely nothing and everything simultaneously. You know, a voice said from the darkness, most people would be devastated by such a public humiliation. Isabel spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows between the rose bushes. Not another vampire, she could tell by the way he moved, too human, too grounded. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, wearing clothes that marked him as nobility. But she didn't recognize him. She was certain she'd never seen him before. Who are you? She demanded, stepping backward. How did you get past the guards? He smiled, and it was knowing, sad somehow. I'm a guest of the king. Or I was before his dramatic exit. My name is Matthias. I've been watching you all evening, actually. Since the moment you walked into that hall looking like you were walking to an execution rather than a wedding. That's not reassuring, Isabel said, her voice sharper than it felt. You're essentially describing stalking. Fair point, Matthias conceded, stepping closer. She noticed his eyes were unusual, grey, with hints of gold around the pupils. But I felt compelled. You see, I know something about you that very few people do. And what's that? That you're not human. The words hung in the air between them like a poisoned blade. Isabel's hand instinctively moved to the small pendant hidden beneath her shirt, a piece of obsidian carved in the shape of a crescent moon, the mark of her bloodline, the secret she'd carried her entire life. How could you possibly? Because I'm like you, Matthias interrupted gently. Not a vampire, not entirely human either, something in between, a hybrid they call it, rare, valuable, dangerous. Isabel's mind spun. She'd been told her entire life that she was the last of her kind, that her mother, a half-vampire, half-witch hybrid, had died in childbirth, that her father had been left with a daughter who was a walking contradiction of nature. She'd been hidden away, kept secret, groomed for this useless marriage that everyone knew was strange. But she'd never known if there were others like her. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because, Matthias said, reaching out his hand but not touching her, tonight you were given something most people never get. A second chance. Dominic rejected the contract. You're free. I'm humiliated, Isabel corrected. Only if you choose to be. He stepped closer and she caught the scent of him, something like cedar and storm. You could leave tonight, now, before anyone remembers you exist. You could disappear into the world and find out who you actually are, beyond what your father told you to be. It was impossible. It was insane. It was everything she'd never allowed herself to want. Come with me, Matthias said, extending his hand again. Just to the borders of the kingdom, just far enough that you can breathe without your father's expectations crushing your lungs. What do you say? Isabel looked at his hand. She looked at the castle behind her, lights still burning despite the funeral atmosphere of the ceremony. She thought about her life, every moment of it planned and controlled and predetermined. She took his hand. They ran through the night, two figures that didn't belong to either world, toward a future neither could have predicted. 3 days of riding brought them to the edges of a forest Isabel had never seen before. The trees were ancient, gnarled things with bark that looked like skin, and the canopy above was so thick that even in daylight it felt like dusk. Matthias had barely spoken during the journey, and Isabel had begun to notice inconsistencies in his story. The way he avoided direct sunlight, the way his eyes seemed to shift color in certain lights, the way he never actually ate anything, just pretended to drink from a canteen that always seemed full. You lied, she said, not accusingly, just stating fact. They were sitting beside a dying fire as night fell on their third night in the forest. I didn't lie, Matthias replied calmly. I just didn't tell you the entire truth. You're not a hybrid, you're a vampire. Half vampire, he corrected. My mother was human. I'm old enough that the distinction matters less with each passing century, but yes, I'm a creature of darkness, not a creature caught between worlds like you are. Isabel felt something sharp twist in her chest. Why did you lie? Because I needed to get you out of there, Matthias said, finally looking at her. His eyes were solid gold now, the human pretense fallen away. And because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane. I'm already involved in insanity, Isabel said dryly. I was supposed to marry a vampire king. I've run away with a stranger. You might as well complete the set. Matthias moved to the edge of their camp, his silhouette stark against the firelight. Dominic Ashford didn't reject you because he didn't want to marry you. He rejected you because he was ordered to. Isabel felt the ground tilt beneath her. What? There's a faction among the vampire nobility, Matthias continued. Powerful families who didn't want Dominic to make that alliance with your father. They needed an heir, a pure-blooded heir. And they feared that if Dominic married you and stayed with you, he'd never take another vampire bride. An heir that was hybrid with your blood and his could be unstable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous to vampire supremacy. So they ordered him to. Yes, Matthias said. I was there that night because I work for them. I was supposed to do exactly what I did, get you out of the kingdom, bring you to this forest and make sure you disappeared. Isabel stood up, backing away. You're going to kill me. No, Matthias said firmly. He didn't move toward her, didn't make any threatening gesture. I was going to. That was the original plan. But 3 days of traveling with you, 3 days of listening to you talk about your life, your dreams, the things you wanted to do if you ever had a choice, I couldn't do it. So what, you had a change of heart? Isabel's voice was bitter. I had an awakening, Matthias said quietly. I've lived for 400 years and I'd never actually lived. Not really. I just existed, doing what I was told, serving powers greater than myself. Then I met you and you were so angry about your lack of choice, and I realized I'd never had a choice either. But maybe now we both could. By letting me run. By letting you choose, Matthias said. Right now you can walk away from me. Back toward the kingdom or forward into the forest or anywhere else you want to go. I won't stop you. No one else will find you here. The faction thinks you're already dead. Your father will assume the worst. You could be anyone, do anything. Isabel felt tears burning her eyes, tears of confusion, fear, anger, and something she didn't want to name. There's something else, Matthias added, his voice dropping. Something about why Dominic specifically rejected you. It wasn't just about the faction's fear of a hybrid heir. What do you mean? I mean, Matthias said, that Dominic Ashford had already made a choice about who he wanted to marry. And when the contract came up, when they told him he'd marry you, he realized he was going to lose the person he actually loved. That's why he rejected the ceremony. That's why he walked away. Before Isabel could ask the obvious question, there was a sound that made both of them freeze. Footsteps, many of them, moving through the forest with uncanny precision. They found us, Matthias whispered. But the figures that emerged from the darkness weren't members of the vampire faction. It was Dominic Ashford, and he wasn't alone. He'd brought an army. His silver eyes locked on Isabel across the flickering firelight, and in that moment she saw something that made her breath catch. Recognition. Not the polite acknowledgement he'd shown her at the altar, but something primal. Something that seemed to reach across the space between them and grab her by the heart. Matthias, Dominic said, his voice carrying a weight that made the very air heavy. You have 3 seconds to explain why you're alone with the woman I've spent the last 72 hours searching for across half the kingdom. And Isabel understood, with a clarity that felt like lightning striking her bones, that nothing about this night was what she thought it was. Everything was about to change. He was protecting her, Isabel said before Matthias could speak. Dominic's gaze shifted to her, and she saw something flicker across his features, surprised that she'd spoken. Protecting her from what? He asked coldly, though his eyes never left hers. From the faction, Isabel said, finding her voice stronger than she expected. He told me everything. He was supposed to kill me. He didn't. He gave me a choice instead. There was a moment of profound stillness. Then Dominic began to laugh. It was a sound like breaking glass, beautiful and dangerous. Of course he did, Dominic said, shaking his head. Matthias, you magnificent fool. You actually fell for her, didn't you? Matthias didn't respond, but Isabel saw the answer in the tightness of his shoulders. Dominic turned back to his assembled guards. Leave us, all of you. Your Majesty, one of them protested. We don't know if... I didn't ask, Dominic interrupted, not unkindly. Leave. They scattered into the darkness like shadows afraid of light. When they were alone, Dominic stepped into the firelight, and Isabel saw him clearly for the first time outside of the ceremonial hall. He looked exhausted, genuinely, deeply exhausted in a way that suggested he hadn't slept since the ceremony. I rejected the marriage, he said to Isabel, because I was ordered to, not because I wanted to. He paused. But that's not the complete truth, is it? Isabel shook her head slowly. The complete truth, Dominic continued, is that I was going to reject it anyway. I was going to find a way anyway to escape an arrangement I never agreed to. But when I walked into that hall and saw you standing at that altar looking like you were being led to execution, he stopped, his jaw tightening. I realized something. The faction was right to fear a union between us because I sensed it in that moment. I sensed what you are. A hybrid, Isabel said. No, Dominic said, a mate. The word hung in the air like a revelation, written in fire. Vampire mythology speaks of soulmates, Dominic explained. Creatures whose bloodlines align so perfectly that when we meet them we know it's rare. It's considered the most powerful bond in our world. Most vampires never find their true mate. I thought I never would. He paused. And then you walked into my life as part of a political arrangement, and my entire existence suddenly made sense. Isabel felt the ground shift beneath her. But you rejected me. I rejected the arrangement, Dominic said quietly. I rejected the idea that our bond would be defined by your father's ambition or the faction's fear. I wanted to choose you freely. I wanted you to choose me freely. I wanted the bond to exist because we both wanted it, not because destiny had written it into our blood. So you lied, Isabel said. You pretended not to want me. I did more than that, Dominic said. I violated the one rule that every vampire king must follow. I broke the law I myself created. He gestured to Matthias. This one was supposed to ensure you never returned to the castle. The faction needed you gone, and I let them believe I wanted it too. But I've spent the last 3 days searching for you anyway, because I needed to know you were safe, because I needed to know you were alive. Matthias stepped forward. Your Majesty, I... Quiet, Dominic said, not harshly. You made your choice. You protected her instead of killing her. That takes more courage than following orders. I won't punish you for that. He turned back to Isabel. But I came here tonight hoping to find you, and I brought an army because I'm prepared to start a war if it means protecting you from the faction. A war between vampires, Isabel asked. For what, for me? Not for you, Dominic said, and now he moved closer, each step deliberate. For my right to choose my own fate, for your right to choose yours, for the principle that even a king should not be bound by rules that rob him of his own will. He stopped in front of her, and Isabel could feel the power radiating off him, ancient, vast, overwhelming. I'm asking you now, he said softly, not as a king demanding a bride, not as a creature of destiny demanding a mate. I'm asking you as a man who saw you at an altar and knew, in that moment, that his entire existence had been a journey leading to you. You don't know me, Isabel whispered. No, Dominic agreed, but I want to, and I want you to know me, all of me, not just the king, not just the vampire, but the being underneath both of those things. And I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to give you the time and freedom you need to understand what this connection means. No contracts, no agreements, no obligations. He extended his hand. Choose me not because you have to, choose me because you want to. Isabel looked at his hand. Then she looked at Matthias, who was watching with something like sadness in his eyes. She thought about the last 3 days of freedom, of having choices for the first time in her life. She thought about the rejection at the altar, how much of herself she discovered in those moments of humiliation. And then she looked back at Dominic, at his silver eyes that contained centuries of loneliness, at the vulnerability in his expression that no creature of his power should be capable of showing. She took his hand. Okay, she said, I'll choose you, but on one condition. Anything, Dominic said. I want my freedom too, Isabel said firmly. I want to know who I am beyond what everyone else needs me to be. I want time. I want space. I want to never be owned by anyone, not my father, not the faction, not even you. Dominic smiled, and it transformed his entire face from beautiful and terrible into beautiful and human. Done, he said, starting now. The castle of Thornwick had been rebuilt, not as a place of grand ceremony but as a true home. Isabel stood in the library, her favourite room, surrounded by books about hybrid bloodlines, ancient magic, and the history of her own lineage. She'd spent the last year learning about herself, training her abilities, building relationships with other hybrids Dominic had connected her with. She and Dominic had become closer, but not in the way the faction feared. Their bond was genuine, chosen, real. She'd rejected his marriage proposal 3 times, and each time he'd simply smiled and said, Ask me again when you're ready. I'll still be here. Matthias had left the vampire faction entirely. He'd become something between, working with Isabel to protect other hybrids, building a network of creatures caught between worlds who needed a place to belong. It was redemption of sorts, though Isabel knew he still carried guilt for what he'd almost done. On this particular evening, Dominic found her in the library as he always did. The faction has formally dissolved, he said, sitting in the chair across from hers. The other houses have pledged to uphold a new law. Vampire nobility can no longer arrange the lives of other creatures, whether human, hybrid, or vampire. Every marriage must be a choice. Did you have to go to war to do that? Isabel asked, though she already knew the answer. Nearly, Dominic said. But when they saw that I was willing to fight for the principle of choice, when they saw that you weren't some fragile human to be managed, but a formidable hybrid with your own power, they reconsidered. Isabel set down her book and walked over to him, taking his hand. I've been thinking about your proposal. His heart jumped visibly, and, "Ask me," she said. He did, and this time her answer was yes. But not because she was bound by blood or magic or destiny. Only because she chose to be. If you've ever felt trapped by the expectations of others, remember that you always have the power to choose your own destiny, just as Isabel discovered that night in the flames. If you want extended stories, join my Patreon and get extended stories, exclusive character backstories, writing tips and creative guidance, direct access to Ask Me Anything, early access to new releases. Your support isn't just a subscription, it's becoming part of a complete storytelling universe. Start your journey at Patreon, link is in description.